Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting on Thursday, the 12th of September of Executive. I am Councillor Claire Douglas, and the chair of this committee, and Executive is one of the two main decision-making bodies of the council. So just looking at the agenda, for a start, do we have any apologies? No, we don't. Everybody's present, so thank you, everybody, for that. Item number 1 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Does anybody have a declaration? Councillor Lomas, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have a non-registerable interest in item 10 on the basis that I have family members working within that sector in York, and so I'll leave the room for that item.
Thank you, Councillor Lomas. Anybody else? Any conflicts of interest? No, thank you. Item number 2 is item number 2 is the minutes of the July the 18th meeting. So I had communication from Councillor Rose on the minutes. Does anybody else have anything else to say on these? No. So Councillor Jason Rose said that when he spoke on the Acomb Front Street item in public participation, that the minutes said and spoke in favour of pedestrianisation of the space. Basically, he would like to have that changed to and presented a local campaign group's request for commitment to future pedestrianisation of the space on their behalf. His point being that he was representing his community rather than his own personal viewpoint on that. So, Robert, I do have the wording, so I can provide that to you afterwards. Right, on that basis, are we happy to approve the minutes? Yes, yeah, so it's unanimously approved. Thank you for that, everybody. Item number 3 is public participation. And this evening, we have 2 members of the public who want to speak. First on the list is Flick Williams, and she wants to speak on item number 14, which is prioritisation of supplementary planning documents. And she's online. Flick, can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon.
Hello, hi. So Flick has requested that she won't have a 30-second warning, so you have 3 minutes and off you go. Thank you.
Executive members, the 4 of you who listened to my speech regarding the need for an SPD on accessibility 2 nights ago without comment will no doubt be relieved to hear that you are not going to hear it again. Instead, I propose to answer the many other responses given in the meeting of the Local Plan Working Group. First, to the question of why we are not going to have an SPD on accessibility when council voted unanimously for it, no one has yet given me a satisfactory answer as to who decided this when. Officers responded in the meeting that they felt there was no need because accessibility is an intrinsic part of the planning process owing to building regulations. Well, I wholeheartedly disagree. Part M of the building regs offers the absolute minimum acceptable standard for access. That is why over years, experts in the access industry wrote and update standards through the British Standards Institute, BS 8300, and those authorities with an SPD for access require applications to meet this higher standard and use it to negotiate with developers. If building regs are sufficient in ensuring accessibility is absolutely paramount, as stated by one officer, please tell me how we have passed planning applications that allowed the building of retail units with a raised threshold, buildings with revolving doors without adjacent automatic alternative, and indeed passed the application for the Roman Quarter that would have built an actual new street with only stepped access at one end of it. It was bankruptcy that saved us from that, not the planning system. To answer the chair's question, what is it about a specific SPD for access that cannot be achieved by other means? I direct you to the design and access statements introduced by the 2004 Act. These should be used to demonstrate how the principles of inclusive design and the needs of disabled people are specifically addressed by the planning application. I have not yet read a single one submitted to this authority that properly does that. If you want to talk about hooks, that is intrinsic to the planning process. Where else can that go? Tucked in with flora and fauna? Similarly, a requirement for change of use permissions to remove raised thresholds in non-listed buildings. Lastly, we heard that you proposed the Access Forum Right to Design checklist. Absolutely not, for 3 reasons. 1, inclusive design principles are not achieved in that way. 2, why would planning committees take any notice? We repeatedly hear from officers that only statutory guidance is enforceable. And lastly, again, the expectation that disabled people in the city must do the heavy lifting for free on something for whom the majority have no technical training. This council does not value that for which it does not pay. And it comes with thinly veiled coercion in, if we don't do it, nothing is going to change. That's just another layer of our oppression. So sorry, no. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Flick, and they will be taken into consideration. And I think that we can expect that executive members may get back to you on this. Thank you very much. Speaker number 2 is Councillor Joe Coles, who is also joining us online. Councillor Coles, can you hear us?
I can, sorry. I was hoping to make it in person, but I'm still at an event, albeit only 5 minutes around the corner.
Thank you. Well, thanks for joining us online. You want to speak on item number 9, which is Lowfield Plot A paper. And you have 3 minutes. Shall I give you a 30-second warning?
Yes, please. I just wanted to refer to the item 9, the Lowfield Green Development, because of the significance of Plot A in the important work that I know the council is doing to improve the supply of housing for adults with learning disabilities and autism. Just a fact around the health inequalities for this particular group, but people with learning disabilities generally live 15 to 20 years less than the general population. So everything that we can do to support that group to improve their life outcomes is really important, both in terms of the housing provision for the city, but also in terms of our council plan and our commitment to reducing health inequalities. It is really disappointing that over the last 10 years there was a big decline in the provision of this kind of housing across the city of York, despite the demand for this kind of housing increasing, and we know that the budget pressures that this has caused have been really difficult. We know also from the paper that the predictions in the number of adults with learning disabilities and autism across the city have been increasing for some time. The warning lights have been flashing, and it's really good that it's been this executive committee that have seen those warning lights and is responding with this paper to set out how we are going to try and meet that demand. I'm really pleased to see that the Labour-run council is waking up and taking action. I'd like to thank the officers and the executive for driving this forward. I've met with officers a number of times about this plot and the importance of using it for supported accommodation for adults with learning disabilities and autism. I would like to urge the executive to try and ensure that the maximum number of units is delivered on this site. And I know it's a relatively small site, but it would be good to see the maximum amount of provision fitted in. It is also a second challenge that I would like to make is about how we can increase this supply across the city. And I would urge the council to work with the combined authority to look for more of these kinds of sites and for the process to be simplified and speeded up so that we can ensure that the council is able to deliver more of this truly affordable housing for York's future population. It's really important that we get more of the right kind of houses that are truly affordable and that we meet the needs of those residents who have additional needs. As a ward councillor, I'm obviously happy to do whatever I can if there are any other suitable plots in the Westfield ward, but I would also refer to the paper that talks about Plot B and the density for that plot that will also be used for affordable housing for older people, so that we ensure that another group whose numbers are increasing across the city is met and that we get their needs met without forcing people. Thank you, Claire. Without forcing people out of the city. So just wanted some reassurance about truly affordable housing and that we will maximise the density of this housing in the areas of the city where we know it's so desperately needed. But thank you for giving me the chance to speak to you.
Thank you for that contribution, and it's most definitely be taken into account. And yes, truly affordable housing in York. We are getting on with it and we're delivering it, and we want to do it across the 10 years and also through into specialist housing as well. So thank you very much for those contributions. Right, item number 4 is the forward plan. Anybody got any comments? Can we approve the forward plan? Yeah, can I see those in favour of the forward plan? Great. Okay, thank you, unanimously approved. And then we move on to the substantive items within the agenda. And item number 5, 6, 7 and 8 are all financial documents, and reports, and Debbie will introduce us to each of those. I'd like to suggest for speakers that we only speak once due to the nature of today's agenda, and also the comments that seem to arise around the finance papers. So if you're okay with it, Councillor, I suggest that you speak on Finance and Performance Monitor 1 and incorporate your comments from the capital programme, Treasury management and medium-term financial strategy into that. Is that acceptable to you?
You're the chair.
Yes. Okay, great, thank you very much. So Debbie, do you want to start on item number 5 then? Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the capital monitoring report. It's the first report of the year, and it sets out progress in delivering the capital programme. You'll see there continues to be a significant level of investment in a range of schemes. There has been a review of the phasing of some of the major projects, including York Central and the Outer Ring Road. So there's been some reprofiling of spend between the years. The report sets out quite a bit of detail and the progress on the schemes, and we're continuing to monitor the spend very carefully. But there are no particular issues to draw to your attention. The recommendations are set out in paragraph 7.
Thank you, Debbie. So the recommendations are on page 24 of the report, as Debbie said in paragraph 7. And those are to recommend to full council the adjustments resulting in a decrease in the 24-25 budget of 81.72 million. Note the 24-25 revised budget of 134.154 million. Note the restated capital programme for 24-25 to 28-29 as set out in Annex 1. And also to approve the grant award to University of York for 530k for the Ouswem flood resilience project. Actually, Debbie, could you just give us a summary of that, please?
Yeah,
Thank
that was a piece. Sorry, I'll just have to get. It's a while since I wrote the report, so I'm sorry. I'll just have to get back to the relevant section of the report. So this was a scheme that's been ongoing, and it was originally for a lower amount than 500,000, so it wasn't a key decision. However, due to inflation and some other factors, the grant award has tipped over the key decision level of 500,000, and that's why I've brought it here for approval.
And my understanding it's from originally from an external body, is that correct?
Yes.
It's external funding.
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So can I see those who are in favour of recommendations at paragraph 7 on page 24 then, please? Thank you. Those are unanimously approved. Thank you. Item number 6 is Finance and Performance Monitor 1 for 24-25. So Debbie, if you could go ahead on that, please.
Yep,
thank you.
Thank you. So again, first report of the year covering the latest finance and performance information. The report outlines a forecast overspend of 3.4 million, which is a significant improvement as to where we were last year at this time. And that improvement is down to a significant amount, well, a lot of work undertaken across all parts of the council to identify savings and mitigations. However, there's always a however, isn't there, with me? But however, there is still an overspend, and therefore cost control measures remain in place, and there is still a lot of work to be done to get back to a balanced budget. So in common with, I think, most of the councils in the country, we're continuing to see increase in demand for services and in the complexity of that demand, particularly across both children's and adult social care. So the summary position is outlined in table 1 at paragraph 16, and the rest of the report just covers a further analysis of the finance and performance across all areas of the council.
Thank you, Debbie. Councillor Eyre, would you like to speak on this item?
My comment, I've written comments for each of the 4 items. Do you want me to wait till the end and then put, if I'm going to speak once, otherwise I'm speaking on this one.
Okay, so you'd rather do it after item 8. Councillor Lomas is going to speak now, I think.
Chair, I think it's appropriate to give our comments on all 4 papers at this point, because I think this is probably the item that it's more pertinent to have discussion on before we vote on it. So my suggestion would be that we share our comments on all 4 papers.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Councillor Eyre, would you like to go ahead then, please?
Okay, I mean, I do find that strange. The capital programme is nearly 500 million, and that's less important than the but I'll try to be brief then, as I prepared comments for each of the 4 items, giving them each the amount of weight that they probably deserve, and wasn't aware that we would have to sort of put them all together. Capital programme, hugely concerning. I think failure to deliver 40% of the capital budget in year is possibly the largest failure to deliver in terms of capital history. That's £80 million for this city that won't be delivered this year. I do note in the paper that there are comments that this is beneficial. I would question that beneficiality. I think given construction inflation is running at about 5 to 10% per annum, that potentially adds £8 to £16 million costs to those capital schemes, which in turn impacts on the revenue budgets of somewhere between 750,000 and £1.5 million a year in cuts that wouldn't be necessary if things were delivered on time. I think in terms of specific schemes, there's not a lot going on. There is reference to the multi-storey car park at the station. I know the deputy leader is fundamentally opposed to this, in fact saying why on a burning earth would we be building that particular one, so I'm interested as to why he hasn't stepped in to stop that from happening. Concerns over Acomb Library, given the issues around Clifton and the failure to raise capital on that one. No mention of the Westfield multi-use games area. Perhaps most worrying though for us is the issues around the York Outer Ring Road. And I do note that the paper says it's subject to a milestone review and a request has been made for a business case. We were not aware that the scheme was under threat and would therefore ask the relevant exec members to commit to delivering that scheme and delivering it by 2029. In terms of revenue, I think we need to place it in context. This budget is the largest growth budget in council's history. £8 million of spending was added. Despite that, you're still in these figures alone overspending by 3.4 million. In reality, that's 5.5 million, as there's a line 2.18 million of unachieved savings that was snuck in there, which has never been done in terms of accounting before. So that's a way of hiding the overspending figure. There's £1 million of savings that have not been achieved, be that through the failed advertising procurement, botched restructures, or the complete failure to understand the library contract. There's also £1 million of savings that were never presented as part of the budget process. I think it's incredulous to believe that nearly £400,000 of maintenance cost savings as a result of a new fleet were not known prior to the budget setting process. The same could have been said about electricity costs and the your waste prices. Added together, those, for example, would have prevented the green bin tax, prevented the library cuts and prevented the cuts to Age UK. So I've really questioned why that information wasn't presented to the public for an honest conversation as part of the budget setting process. Raised concerns about the £200,000 recurring saving from concessionary fares. The concessionary fares levels are below where they were at 2019. That's an acceptable fact of COVID. I'm not sure why we're saying that we're not even going to try and get those back to 2019 pre-COVID concessionary fare levels, let alone trying to get them higher than that one. And then in terms of the medium-term financial strategy that we're getting onto next, I think we were all clear at full council. Both of our parties put forward motions calling on the need for government to act in terms of that one. Your motion put forward a letter. I hope you can update us on the progress of that letter that you sent to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and what that response was and what the date will be of the fair funding review. Our motion was more pressing than that and mentioned the need in this next financial settlement to actually have that 90% floor introduced. I have not as yet had a request to sign that particular letter, so I think that ship has probably sailed and we won't be getting that 90% ceiling cap for York desperately needs. York is massively underfunded, and this year, next year and the year below, you will not be able to blame the Tories for that. That will be the response of the Labour Party and the Labour Party alone.
Thank you for that, Councillor Eyre. Debbie, do you want to add any technical corrections at all or comment?
No, I would, the savings, were all presented. The savings I think that Councillor Eyre referred to were part of, a larger amount where I think we were quite clear that we were going to go away and identify where those savings could come from, and hence having them in this report is trying to just be a bit transparent about where we did go away and get those savings from, because we didn't have that information at the time that the budget was set.
Thank you. Yes, that's exactly what I thought. Councillor Lomas, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. On the capital monitor, of course, while we are facing a funding crisis and having to make really, really difficult decisions around our budgets, it is good to move borrowing costs where we can. And I think it's also important to think about how our capital programme is funded, because it's not all funded by the council borrowing. Much of it is funded externally, and council borrowing adds to that to make sure that we can realise a really ambitious programme for the city. Councillor Eyre talks about failing to deliver. That I'm not aware of anything that we've said we're not going to deliver. There are programmes like, for example, the York Outer Ring Road, where it is highly dependent on external funding. And of course, because it is so long since that was first talked about, and as Councillor Eyre rightly points out, we have had significant inflation since then, it's only right that the costs are reassessed. And the project is looked at before anybody goes about spending money, because what we don't want to do is overcommit ourselves when we're not in a position to be able to afford to deliver things. So I make no apology for taking a really careful approach to the capital programme. I'm very grateful for the work that officers continually do to review the capital programme, to look at what is needed, to look at how we can remain ambitious for our city, even in a difficult financial situation. So I think that there's nothing that I'm aware of that we're going to fail to deliver. In fact, there's loads of stuff that's being delivered, which is frankly miraculous given the financial situation we're in. Moving on to finance and performance, I think thanks has to go for all of the work that everyone throughout this entire council, that's staff, that's councillors, that's the volunteers, the partners that we work with, for getting us into a much, much better position at this point this year than we were at this point last year. At this point last year, we were facing such an enormous overspend that we had to act really quickly to try to put some things in place to pull it back. This year, we're still facing an overspend, but it's much more modest. And getting to this point and facing a much more modest overspend evidences what this council can do when we work together, when we take it seriously, when we don't play politics, but we get our heads down and we say, we need to get on and do this. And that is what has happened. And I am very grateful for everybody, for the work that everybody has done on that. But we can't become complacent, and we've still got work to do. There is still an overspend that needs pulling back. We are in the process at the moment of having our big budget conversation and talking about next year's budget, and that's going to be really crucial as well. The reality of our position is that our funding has not kept pace for the last 14 years. That it's not kept pace with the increases in cost, and it's not kept pace with the increases in demand. And this means we've now got less money to deliver more services, and delivering those services costs more. The majority of our funding, of course, goes on adult and children's social care, and we will never make an apology for spending that money on those people who need it most at the time when they need it most. We have made difficult decisions. We've made decisions to reduce services. We've made decisions to charge for services. we've made decisions to deliver services in a different way to save money. And that's been really, really tough for everybody involved. And it will continue to be really tough for everybody involved. But I remind everyone the reason why we're doing that. We're doing that so that we can continue to deliver services for those people in this city who need it most, and to retain that ambition for our city despite the situation we are in. And finally, on the medium-term financial strategy, it is absolutely right to remain cautious about predictions for the future. Local authorities in this country are amongst a massive crowd of public functions that are facing a funding crisis after 14 years of Conservative government. And it is absolutely clear that it will take years to fix the problems that have been caused. There is no magic money tree, as I think we're all aware of. And we have to remain steadfast in delivering services, doing what we can to manage until our country is in a better financial position under new leadership and can start growing again. So in the meantime, we'll continue to make decisions on the basis of our council plan and our council priorities, and we'll make those decisions to keep going and to keep on providing the services we can and retaining that ambition for each and every member who lives in our city.
Thank you, Councillor Lomas. And I would just like to say at this point as well that the fact that we are still overspent at this point in the year is disappointing. There's no doubt about it. But it is just expected now, I think, in the environment that we've all been working under for many years, with increasing demand and inflation too. But the fact that we are in a far better place than we were this time last year is an absolute credit to the pain and the hard work that everybody has gone through. And that is certainly the case for officers and councillors within the council. But we shouldn't forget, and I say this in public every opportunity I get, that there is no service and no resident in the city who isn't affected by this. There is no fat on the bones anymore, and it is all tremendously difficult. So thank you to everybody for your work and your fortitude. But the work isn't over yet, and we will need to continue to work together constructively. And I still hold true to the fact that we will not fund things with one-off spending that will require recurring spend, because that just isn't the way to go. It is not fair on anybody, and we can't survive if we do that financially. So thank you, everybody, and let's move to the recommendations on report number 6, the Finance Performance Monitor number 1. So they're on page 48 and 49 at paragraph 9. And that says, Executive is asked to note the finance performance information. Note that work will continue on identifying the savings needed to fully mitigate the forecast overspend, and approve the 900,000 savings identified in paragraph 68 needed to deliver the place service review saving agreed in the 24-25 budget. So there you go, it's said there, stated in the agreed 24-25 budget. So can I see those who are in favour of those recommendations? Thank you. So that's approved unanimously. Debbie, do you want to move on to item number 7, Treasury Management, Q1 Prudential Indicators? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So this report was considered by Audit and Governance Committee last week in their scrutiny role, so they've been through this in some detail. We continue to invest in line with our priorities of security, liquidity and yield, and continue to closely monitor interest rates. We've taken out just one new loan of £10 million in the first quarter of the year, which was as anticipated and as budgeted for, but there are no other issues to draw to your attention.
Thank you for that. So the recommendations on this item are on page 92 at paragraph 6, 7 and 8. And the paragraph 6 is to note the 24-25 Treasury management activity up to the first quarter, which ended on the 30th of June, and the prudential indicators outlined in Annex A, and note the compliance with all indicators. And then paragraph 7 and 8 state that it's a statutory duty for the council to determine and keep under review the affordable borrowing limits, and that the council has operated in the first quarter of 24-25 within these Treasury and prudential indicators as set out in the Treasury management strategy, and that there are no policy changes to the Treasury management strategy statement for members to agree and approve. So can I see those who are in favour of those recommendations? So it's unanimously approved. Thank you for that. And then finally, Debbie, on to item number 8, which is the medium-term financial strategy update. Thank you.
Thank you. So this report just provides an update on the medium-term financial position and outlines the 25-26 budget process. The report sets out some of the key assumptions, and it's important to remember these are just planning assumptions. They're not decisions. It is, of course, for council to make those decisions. These assumptions remain under review and will be updated as and when appropriate. The Chancellor will set out a national budget in October, but we still won't know the impact on individual councils until we get our draft settlement in December, if there is any impact on councils. The table at paragraph 26, I think it is, 26 summarises the overall picture and shows a cumulative budget gap of just under 30 million over the next 3 years. And the report also outlines at a high level the kind of strategy for closing this forecast budget gap, and that's the bullet points at paragraph 32. So that's a combination of things from last year, really, that maximising income, continue to focus on organisational efficiency, reviewing contracts, etc. However, that won't deliver 30 million, so there will need to be some cuts in services, and a programme of work has been put together that will support a series of reviews that will look at structures and working practices and customer experience across various services to help identify where savings can be made. So it's the kind of the start point, and the report also just sets out the budget consultation, what's been done so far, and just how that's phased throughout the year for that ongoing conversation.
Thank you for that. Yes, and I think that we can all appreciate and see that the medium-term financial position of the council has not changed. We still fully expect that these pressures to be here with us for the next few years. And so we will be continuing the extensive programme of review and interrogation of the way that the council operates in order to make sure that we can achieve this financial strategy and our goals in this respect, to keep the council's finances afloat, keep us on track to deliver and to deliver budgets that are balanced and meet our financial requirements and also duties. So thank you for everybody for that. So on page 114, we have recommendations at paragraph 8, and that is to agree the medium-term financial strategy as outlined in this report. And I see those who are in favour of that recommendation. Thank you, that's approved too. So thank you for all of the work to everybody who has had input into the financial statements and reports that have been presented to us today, and in the wider sense to everybody that has committed a great deal of time, effort and energy into keeping us on track to deliver on our stated outlined and agreed budget for 24-25. So thank you for that. Item number 9 is the delivery of supported affordable housing at Lowfield Green, and that is going to be presented to us by Sarah Story from Adult Social Care, Corporate Director for Adult Social Care. Adults and Integration. I always get that title wrong, apologies. And then we have Michael Jones and Sophie Round from Housing that are joining us too. So please take your seats. And who is starting on this? Sarah, off you go. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for receiving this paper, which is a really fantastic piece of work that I'm really pleased to bring for decision today. And thank you to officers who've worked really hard over the last couple of months and across several different departments of the council to put together the analysis and the work to enable us to bring this for a decision. I won't say too much more because I'll assume people have had a chance to read the paper, and I know you've got a really busy agenda today. But it's just to note really that supported living is a really important provision to enable people to live as independently as possible and for as long as possible. And we know it's important to people because they've told us. And if people do live independently for longer and they have their own front door, then generally they live healthier, happier lives. But actually that tends to be more cost effective as well. So in order for us to develop these types of provisions, we do need to understand the need that we have in the city in terms of people with disabilities, people with mental health and elderly people, and what sort of support people might need in the future. So we've done some analysis for this particular type of accommodation, and we know that we've got some significant gaps at the moment that we hope that Lowfield Plot A will help us to start to fill. I think it's really important also to say, of course, that there is further work to do, because we know that if we want to continue to progress those principles of supporting people to live independently, we also need to progress our strategy and our approach. So hopefully this will be the first of many initiatives that we can work together on to make sure that we've got sufficient, appropriate, safe, independent accommodation for everybody that needs it in York. Okay, so I'll just pass on to colleagues just see if there's anything that we want to add. Thank you.
Just briefly, thank you, and absolutely agree. Thank you to all the officers involved from Housing and Adult Social Care. It's been a really strong joined up effort to create this comprehensive paper, which hopefully will be the first of many in this area. So I think just to add to that in terms of kind of next steps, so we'll need to procure a design team, we'll need to put the meat on the bone around this proposal. At the moment it's a high level outline proposition that we think will work. Lots of work to do in terms of working with the local community and future residents, their families, their carers, to kind of co-design this development and make sure their voices are heard in terms of shaping this development. So this paper seeks a budget to do that work, to take a scheme up to planning, and then to develop a more detailed business case, which will have much more of the kind of financial information in terms of investment required to deliver this scheme and how it will work in the long term. So this is the kind of starting gun on the project, and will enable us to do all of that really important work to get a fully developed scheme into planning and bring a business case back to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Sophie, do you want to say anything at all? No, you're okay. Thank you. And I couldn't agree more on the observation of really, really successful cross-directorate working, which is hugely important to me personally, to see the effectiveness of how our organisation works together in order to deliver for the people of and the citizens of York. It's hugely important, and thank you for in the past 12 months really taking that mantle forward and finding new and I think really rewarding ways of working together. So I will now ask members if you'd like to speak. Councillor Eyre, do you want to go ahead? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very briefly, obviously fully support the proposal, and thanks to the officers for the work they've done. It is something that we were looking at the time we were in administration, and during that period we couldn't get the business case together to actually make that. I think that is the concern we have from this paper, is that there is no business case and no sense of where that funding will come from. Obviously, hopefully there is information that we don't have as opposition councillors that give you the reassurance that that is achievable, because it does put £500,000 of public funds forward to be spent prior to a business case coming forward, which isn't normally the way we would do things. So just generally hope you have the assurances that that funding will come through and this £500,000 isn't put at risk.
Thank you, councillor. Do officers want to respond at all to that in a technical manner? Thank you.
Yeah, so just to give you that reassurance that in the background, we have worked with finance. We've run various viability assessments. We've had independent work done on the cost assumptions, and we are content that at the moment we have a viable proposition. We now need to do that detailed bit of work. We need to do that design work, and we will keep running those viability appraisals at each of those key REBA stages. So that is something that we are very focused on and will continue to be throughout the design process.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stills-Walshaw.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sophie, for that reassurance. And many thanks to Sophie, Michael, Sarah, and the whole of the team. Such a huge amount of work's gone into this report. And also thank you to Councillor Coles for her supportive comments. Supported housing is a concept developed as an alternative to existing care solutions for disabled people. People in supported housing have so much more control over who they live with and how they live their lives, including the support they get. It meets the council's priorities to reduce the number of people entering residential and nursing care and prevents hospital admissions. And it can also accommodate people with significant additional needs in safe, good quality housing. The need for this type of supported housing is increasing, and estimates are that we'll need another 30 spaces in supported housing by 2029. This supported housing reduces the need for vulnerable people to be accommodated elsewhere in the country, keeping people in their own communities, which is the best option for them. The current lack of capacity in York has led to increased costs in out-of-area placements. I urge everyone to support this proposal due to the benefits it will have for the people who will live in these homes and for the benefit of the community that they will be part of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stills-Walshaw, and I couldn't agree more. And I think the other aspect that it would be amiss to not mention is the very close partnership working across health and adult social care now. And I'm sure as this project moves forward, there will be conversations between those two parties, and the York Place Board has been tremendously successful in building those relationships. So I'm really optimistic for what benefit that can bring to us to deliver on this too. So thank you very much, everybody. So the recommendations are on page 127 and 128. And they are in paragraphs 22 to 26, and they are very extensive, as always. Who wrote this? They're not going to own up to it now. Michael, was it not you? I think it was. So they're really extensive and really explain the decisions we're making to do. So it's all around the development of Plot A at Lowfield Green for specialist housing for adults with learning disabilities and or autism. 23, agreeing the allocation of £480,000 from the housing revenue account for the design development of Plot A. And then moving through to the full business case prior to procuring and appointing a building contractor. Paragraph 24, approve the use of the York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority Brownfield Housing Fund grant. And I would really like to thank the Combined Authority for awarding us that grant to take this project forward. I know it's been huge excitement in the housing team that has happened, and a really good example of money coming through to us from the Combined Authority to support our council priorities, which is exceptional. So we are approving the use of that grant, and we are delegating authority to the Director of Housing and Community Services in consultation with the Director of Governance and the Director of Finance to enter into the resulting funding agreement. We are approving the procurement of an external multidisciplinary team to design the homes and submit a planning application. And that is, we are delegating authority again there to the Director of Housing and Community Services and Director of Adult Services and Integration in consultation with Director of Governance and Head of Procurement to take steps towards that contract. And then note the officers are considering the options for specialist care providers to deliver support services once the property is constructed. And they will carry out soft market testing with providers and bring back a further recommendation to executive on that matter. I would imagine in a few months, or a while, shall I say, a while. So can I see those who are in favour of all those recommendations? Thank you. Wholeheartedly in agreement, and that's approved. So please go forward and carry out the project. Marvellous. Thank you, everybody. Item number 10. Councillor Lomas is leaving the room at this point due to conflict of interest that she noted with us earlier. So she's gone. Item number 10 is developing a special educational needs and disabilities SEND Family Hub. Is another hugely exciting project that is ongoing, and Maxine Squire is here to tell us about the paper. So welcome, Maxine, and off you go. Thank you.
Councillor Douglas. As you'll see described in the paper is an exciting proposal to develop, as part of our suite of family hubs, a dedicated SEND family hub. The parents and carers of children with additional needs often report that it's very difficult to navigate and find information about the way that the SEND system works in practice. And one of the reasons why we brought this proposal to the executive is a way to improve our commitment to a tell us once approach, that we'll have a physical front door for the SEND local offer in the city through the development of this dedicated family hub. It will be a partnership building, and it isn't to invest in new resources, it's to make better use of the resources that partners in the local area have by co-locating those resources in one place, making it accessible from the fact that it is in one place, and opening up and improving access to information and support in a way that supports early intervention and early identification. It's very much focused on need rather than diagnosis. And it will be a place where parents and carers can feel comfortable about going and accessing advice in a building, which also will include 3 providers who will be working out of the building, York Inspirational Kids, Snappy, and St Paul's Nursery Enhanced Resource Provision, all of whom have already started on their journey together in the way in which they also view themselves as being providers that can improve the way that they work in partnership around support for children with additional needs. It also provides opportunities for us to increase the move towards integration across education, health and care by physically having people and professionals working together. And we hope that it will feel to be a less clinical approach for parents and carers very often, who the first time they meet certain professionals, they will be in very formal situations, but it's a place that will allow them to feel more comfortable and relaxed. And also it will be a place where they can gain support from the Parent Carer Forum and from Sendias. So a true partnership building to open up that opportunity to feel that the local offer is more accessible. We've done a lot of work around digital resources, but there's no substitute, parents and carers are telling us, to actually being able to go and meet people and have things explained, if that's your preference. So I would like to ask that the proposal is approved and that we can move forward on developing the full potential of the SEND hub.
Thank you, Maxine. Yep, sounds great. Who would like to speak on this. Councillor A, do you want to go ahead? And thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, very briefly, perfectly sensible approach, support everything that's in the paper. I think we're lucky in York that we managed to keep hold of those children's centre buildings from previous administrations when a lot of administrations across the country lost those. So that gives us the opportunity to repurpose those and get towards that truly multidisciplinary hub, drawing all those organisations, some fantastic organisations based in here. I think we did reflect as a group that the Children and Family Act 2014 and the SEND regulations of 2014 created a huge level of responsibility for local authorities, but never actually the resources to deal with many of those issues. So I think this is one way to start to partly to deal with those. So obviously, I also want to acknowledge some of the work that my colleague Councillor Cuthbertson did in the run up to this, building about the family hub funding that came into the city, and this is building on that. So fully supportive.
Thank you, Councillor A. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I somehow suspected that this would have been a Lib Dem idea before we knew about it, but there you go. I just think this is absolutely fantastic stuff that again is being delivered by this administration. Families who are navigating the SEND system, you know, as Maxine has said, find this incredibly difficult. And it would be wrong to say that the City of York Council always gets everything right as well when it comes to support and helping people to navigate that system. And again, I think it'd be absolutely fair to say that for people in my position up and down the country, councillors in my position, they'd all say exactly the same thing. It's an incredibly difficult system to navigate. Despite absolutely hard-working council officers doing their absolute best to support when the demand on staff is greater than it has ever been. And I think that what this item talks to is the fact that in York, we are listening to parents and we are acting on this. And this SEND hub is as part of the Raise York initiative is a really good example of this. I'm really pleased that the Parent Carer Forum is engaged with this, and their expertise is absolutely welcome and central to this. That parental voice is so important. And this space will be a forward-facing space to provide additional support. And this space will also be a great example of partnership work involving Snappy, York Inspirational Kids, Autism Hub, St Paul's Nursery, and professionals from the council and the NHS from health. Bringing everyone together to do this is a really, really powerful statement. And I want to thank staff who've led on this and those organisations and families who've stepped up and engaged so far. I'm really pleased. Let's get started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. And I have to say that this to me is indicative of the amazing work that is going on within children's services and education across the directorate, and the improvements that are being made really rapidly, and you know, really listening to people who are touching services, parent carers and young people and children, and it's a really tremendously effective way of working, and I look forward to seeing it out there in the community. So thank you, Maxine. And the recommendations are on page 164 of the pack, and paragraph 16, 17. And the report seeks approval to create a SEND family hub within one of the existing CYC family hubs. The identified site is in Clifton and presents the greatest opportunity to deliver the SEND hub. And 17 says that this will strengthen our local offer to families in time and ensure a more coordinated response to developing complex need. And can I see who those are, those who are in agreement with that and approval? So that is unanimous and it's approved. And yes, another one to go forward and let's get it done. So thank you very much, Maxine. Thank you for everything you do every day. I know you work tremendously hard. So thank you. So item number 10, I assume you're staying where you are. So we have item number 11, which is commissioning. Oh, Councillor Lomas going to sit down. Item number 11 is commissioning of new and expanded places for childcare reform. So we have Maxine, and I'm really sorry, I don't know your names. Can you just use the microphone and introduce yourselves, please?
Yes, so my name's Kerry Lee and I'm the Wraparound Project Officer.
Thank you. And
my name's Dawn Wood and I'm Early Years and Childcare Reforms Programme Lead.
thank you. Thank you. Maxine, are you starting?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And over to my colleagues. The paper that you have in front of you this evening is around the commissioning of new and expanded places to deliver the childcare reforms. As executive are aware, there is an extended entitlement to early years and childcare spaces, which the previous government and the current government have continued to promote. The early years is a crucial stage in life, and getting it right is so important because a good experience of the early years affects whole life outcomes. And in the city, we have a very strong approach to the early years, and particularly to the delivery of the sufficiency duty, both in terms of the supply of early years, entitlement places, and also wraparound care, and that's been established over a number of years. We are now moving into a phase where again, some major projects need to start to begin to meet the enhanced sufficiency duty. To do that, we've been awarded some additional capital funding from by the Department for Education, and also some revenue funding to support the growth in early years and childcare places. My colleagues are doing work related to that to ensure that those places are grown in the right areas in the city through the work that is going on around sufficiency planning. At the moment, we are meeting that sufficiency duty, but we do know that to meet the enhanced standards from September 2025, there will need to be some growth in local markets. And to facilitate that growth, we are wanting to establish the process for allocating the capital, the additional capital and revenue funding. That's been worked on through a procurement board for the early years and childcare reforms. And we are seeking approval from the executive to delegate the decision making around the allocation of those resources and the entering into those grant agreements with providers to the Corporate Director for Children and Education in partnership with the Director of Finance and the Director of Legal Services. I'm going to hand over to Kerry and Dawn to add any specific details.
Yes, I suppose just to speak on the wraparound project in particular, really exciting for the city. I think it's the first time in as long as I can remember that money has been given from central government to work on wraparound. And we've got a really strong sector in York. So yeah, really excited to kind of build on that and expand what we've already got.
Thank you. Dawn?
Just to update that we are refreshing the data to ensure that we get those places in the right areas to ensure that those families can access that childcare. So we did have data last year, but we are refreshing that to make sure that they are in the right places moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor A, would you like to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chair. Again, obviously, hugely supportive of the paper, and thanks for the work that officers have done. I think the issue we always had going back last year was about that disconnect between the expectation that was generated by the policy in itself, followed by the funding that came from the previous government, and there wasn't quite the same level of funding as there was expectation that was created. So I think what has actually happened, as so often happened with that particular government, is that shifted a whole lot of work onto local authorities and the provider sector in there. And I have absolutely no doubt that in York, both providers and officers will step up to take that particular challenge, because this is so hugely important. I mean, that capital funding in there is incredibly small for the amount of work that needs to be done. Not to say it's insignificant, but you could probably take 3 or 4 times that and it still wouldn't address the needs that we have. So absolutely support everything you can do, and anything we can do as a group to work with both the providers and yourselves to help make sure that we get the absolutely maximum out of that as we possibly can.
Thank you, Councillor A. Councillor Webb?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I think it's an interesting one, this one, isn't it? That we're again getting things moving here. We've got an expanded entitlement. There's been national money provided for that, and the pressure is on to grow. And I think that this is obviously the starting gun really for that process to make sure it can happen effectively and efficiently. For me, the interesting thing about this childcare is this sort of change in tone, I suppose, between the previous government and this government. The previous government, it was very much just about, can we get more people into work? And obviously by providing that childcare, that is what happens. And what I'd like to think is that actually, certainly this government and certainly this administration, we've changed that slightly, that yes, that is absolutely important, but also we should not lose the benefits of just childcare on those young people. And the real benefits of them interacting with other young people and the benefits to their health and well-being. And I'm glad that that's sort of in this report. It's fair to say that the expansion is going to be a challenge. It's going to be a big one. You know, as we've heard, that there is an expansion to that wraparound provision as well. And one little thing I did want to mention is CYC was successful in securing just £10,000, a tiny amount of money relative to everything else, from the DfE to support commissioning of specialist after-school provision for children with complex needs. And that's something that's not happening anywhere else. So it's just a little starter, but, you know, again, it's just a nod to us doing things slightly differently. And I just want to say thank you publicly to staff who are going to be working on this and are already working on this. And also those providers who are doing an absolutely fantastic job day in, day out. It's a job that I know for a fact I could not do. But for those who can and do, I'm absolutely amazed by them. So it's really, really hard, and conditions nationally have not been great for them, but hopefully we're seeing a change. So this is a positive step. Thanks for everything you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody for all the work that you're doing. And I just would like to say one small thing, that expanding childcare for more families is hugely important for school readiness for children as well, and that has a lifelong impact. The data is unequivocal, isn't it? So this is hugely exciting. And we know there's huge challenges, and there are huge challenges within the sector as well. And we will represent those through to national government as well, wherever we can. But I think this is a step in the right direction, and I'm looking forward to seeing the expansion of provision in the city, as long as it's funded. We need it funded. Everybody does. So thank you for that. And the recommendations on this paper on page 178 and 179, and the executive is asked to approve the capital and revenue spend to create new early years and wraparound places to deliver this ambitious government programme. Approve the use of the DfE 23 to 34 childcare capital expansion grant allocation to increase the capacity of early years and wraparound provision in York, and use the DfE wraparound programme revenue grant allocation to support the delivery of additional wraparound places for primary school children, and then to delegate authority to the Corporate Director of Children and Education, the Director of Governance and the Director of Finance to take steps as are necessary to develop the grant allocation process, procure, award and enter into the resulting grant agreements. Can I see those who are in favour of those? Thank you very much, everybody. It's unanimously approved, and please go forward and, and do now. So thanks, everybody. Right. We have item number 12 next on our agenda, which is recommissioning of Advocacy Hub services in York. And we have Sarah Story here, who's Corporate Director of Adult Services and Integration. Look, I did that seamlessly then, didn't I, for a change? So Sarah, please introduce this to us. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for receiving this paper, which is the decision to re-procure the advocacy services in York. And thank you to Edward Njaguna, who unfortunately is unwell today, so he's not been able to join us. So hopefully I will do his work justice, and he has put a really significant amount of time and effort into engaging with people who use advocacy services, people who work in those services, to develop the options for this paper to take forward the re-procurement. I'm also particularly pleased, having met with some of our York People First self-advocates in the city a couple of times when I first started work here in York, that we've been able to include a very small amount of capacity to support self-advocacy forums for adults with learning disabilities, with a view to progressing a learning disability partnership board, which will be really important to enable people with learning disabilities to have their voices heard, not just in respect of adult services or health services, but through engagement with the council and other organisations across the health and care city, you know, in respect of a number of initiatives where we should be hearing those voices. So advocacy, it's a really important service to enable us to promote and protect people's human rights. And this is usually at a time when the people that we're talking about, when they use those services and need those services, are particularly vulnerable and at risk of having those rights restricted, and may find it particularly difficult actually to engage around, for example, assessments of their healthcare or social care needs, around what the plan might be to meet those needs, about where they might live, and about potential restrictions, for example, if they need to go into hospital under Mental Health Act provisions. We also support parents where we have care proceedings in place, and we're supporting parental advocacy. Again, really important that we support people to be able to have a voice, but also to be able to challenge us as professionals and as organisations. They have the right under law to do that, and it's absolutely right that we should support people to have that capacity. This contract is past due, so it was extended within the remit of its original contract and then waived. So we do need to go ahead and procure, and if we don't, we wouldn't meet some really important statutory responsibilities. So we're saying there's not really many options in terms of how we deliver this. Whether we deliver this, but actually there's a significant amount of work that's gone into understanding the quality of that provision, access to it, and how we make sure that we've got sufficient services available in the city. That's probably all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, and personally, I'm really glad, as you mentioned, to see the People First advocacy group given some capacity, because I know both you and I have met with them as a hugely important part of the city that we certainly need to develop further in both of our views, I know. Councillor Eyre, do you want to speak on this item?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hugely supportive of the paper. Back in a previous life, I actually used to share an office with the York Advocacy Hub. Absolutely fantastic work they do. I mean, we get so much value out of that. Hugely complex, really important work they do. I think if we reflect on this, it's very worthwhile that we still have general advocacy as part of that contract. I think the decision to bring all the advocacy services together has really made sure that we've maintained levels of advocacy that probably don't happen elsewhere, especially in mental health. When you talk to service users, one of the biggest issues they always say is they need more advocacy, they need more support, and there's very little of it across the country these days, but we've managed to maintain, as part of this, some of that particular work. The self-advocates from York People First, absolutely fantastic. I remember during that time I was sharing an office with them, I was asked to do a talk on political parties in the run up to the election to help those people to explain and to discuss what the actual differences between political parties. I assure you I was purely partisan, did not favour any particular, and did my best to articulate the views of the various different groups. So the only thing I would say is, and there's probably nothing we can do in the current political climate, but there is not enough money in this contract for the work that they do and the work that needs to be done, and anything we can do to lobby the NHS especially and bringing more funding in, anything else we can do to get more funding to this advocacy contract, because the rewards and payoff for those individuals who are going through some really difficult and really often very horrendous times, they really need that support. The support we provide is fantastic, and the more we can do, the better.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre. Councillor Stills-Walshaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all the team for the really hard work on this. The Advocacy Hub in York is vital in several ways, as they're set out in this report, in helping people to in non-statutory decisions, as well as helping them to challenge key decisions being made about them that affect them. The Advocacy Hub can support people to speak out, support them around informing them of their rights, and the service supports people to develop their own self-advocacy skills and empowers people to become more independent. Advocacy supports people to express their views and wishes and helps them to have an awareness and a voice of their rights. I welcome this report in setting out the positives, but not shying away from highlighting the challenges in paragraph 17 in particular that the service faces. Demand for advocacy hubs and services has increased because of the pressure on public service and the impact on year after year of austerity, most notable in the demand increase in that of the independent mental health advocacy, which increased by more than 300% last year. The current model's been commissioned since 2017 and through the skilled team has ensured responsiveness to people requiring advocacy in the community. It's impossible to overestimate the importance of this service for some of the most vulnerable people in our city whose rights must be prioritised and protected. The survey that was conducted for 4 weeks in July and August 24 to find out people's views of the hubs and meetings that took place with groups of people with learning disabilities and self-advocates. And the feedback from this was that people who use the Advocacy Hub found it really, really helpful. The respondents reported that they'd like to see the service improved by increasing numbers of staff and waiting times. And the council's funding commitment to the hub through this contract will be protected and will be added by the ICB in the years ahead. The current service has demonstrated positive outcomes in being responsive to customers and ensuring a positive experience. So in re-procuring this contract, we will continue to meet the needs of vulnerable adults who benefit from advocacy. The Advocacy Hub sits within our whole systems approach, and it will ensure better services and working together for people through the links with the Better Care Fund and the mental health hubs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steels-Walshaw. So the recommendations on this item are on page 206 at paragraph 11, A and B. So we're approving the procurement of a new contract for the Advocacy Hub service for an initial term of 3 years with an option to extend for up to further 2 and to delegate authority to the Corporate Director of Adult Services and Integration in consultation with Head of Procurement to take such steps as are necessary to carry out the procurement, and B, delegate authority to the Corporate Director of Adult Services and Integration in consultation with Director of Governance and the Head of Procurement to take such steps as are necessary to award and conclude the contract for the Advocacy Hub service. So can I see those who are in agreement with those recommendations? So that's unanimous and approved. Thank you. Great. Thanks very much, Sarah, and thanks for joining us this evening. Item number 13 on the agenda is Safer York Partnership Community Safety Strategy. And we have James Gilchrist here to introduce us to this paper. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Chair. So it's a statutory requirement under the Crime and Disorder Act 98 to have a strategy in place. And that should look at the priorities and strategic needs to deal with the significant issues that require a multi-agency approach. And this strategy before you shows how we'll tackle that multi-agency approach. But just to assure anybody watching, it doesn't mean that we're not doing the day-to-day stuff as well in our single partner roles. This is about how we come together to tackle those big issues. So those priorities for York are detailed in the strategy. As I mentioned, that strategy is underpinned by multi-agency meetings and the way we work together across issues such as domestic abuse. Some of those are dealt with at a York and North Yorkshire level, and that's obviously working now with the new arrangements under the combined authority going forward. We are working with stakeholders to build a performance framework which will help us manage better how we are doing and keep track of how we are addressing these really important issues. We have for a long time now done a biannual report to scrutiny, and that will obviously continue about how we're progressing on this. this strategy is part of the policy framework and therefore needs to go to full council. So the recommendation is that this goes forward, should you agree it tonight, that goes forward to full council. We do a regular refresh, so in January we'll be starting our next round of refresh.
Thank you, James. That's really helpful. Can I see who wants to speak on this item? Councillor Eyre, do you want to? Yep, please go ahead. Thank you.
Very briefly, obviously, happy all the work's gone forward. The one everybody did want to flag was around the safe and supported communities. And I think, again, it's a resource issue going forward, but this has to work for the city as a whole and not just the city centre. And I think some of those links between the police especially and ward councillors, ward committees, parish councillors isn't as strong as it has been. For instance, how we start to reinforce that and get some of that work going. I know, for example, in my parish council, we probably had one report from the police in the last 5 to 6 months. So it's not just ward committees, there are parish councils and the police obviously under huge pressure, huge resource issues, and how we get those working again and get those links with all our communities to make sure that it's operating for the whole of the city.
Thank you, Councillor. James, would you like to respond to that?
We've obviously got new structures emerging in both in the combined authority, but also within the police force itself, who are undergoing a bit of a restructure themselves at the moment. I think some of you may have received emails explaining some of those changes. So I'm sure some of that will bed itself in and will address some of those points, but we can pick those up with those people in those new roles.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, James. And please thank Jane and everybody in the Safe York Partnership. The gestation period of an elephant is 22 months. The gestation period of this report is longer. It's not our lead. And we'll now be shortly about to welcome our 4th police commander since we started working on this in 2022, as evidenced by the fact that it's the 2023-26, just in case anybody was wondering, community safety strategy. But it's important to get it right. And ourselves and our partners, the probation service, the police, fire and rescue, the bid, the mayor, the office of the police and crime commissioner, and now the deputy mayor for police and fire, and make it York. And Councillor is absolutely right. It's more than about the city centre. It's about a strategy for counter-terrorism, which is incredibly important, but it's about violence. It's about serious organised crime. It's about violence towards women and girls. It's about modern slavery and domestic abuse. These are incredibly important things, and they're worth spending time to get right. And the fact that we're now moving to a performance framework in which we'll be able to actually evidence, does this strategy make a difference? And we'll be able to report to that to scrutiny, and then hopefully back to executive. I think it is absolutely vital. Otherwise, it becomes another report that sits on a shelf, and that's not what we're about, and that's not what the partners are about. So let's make it live, let's make it real, and let's see a much safer city for all. Recommend the approval of taking it to full council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pavlovic, and I couldn't agree more with you that this is a hugely important area for all of our communities across the whole city, isn't it? And we've seen a number of situations arise or potentially arising in our city over the past months that these kind of partnerships are crucially important in dealing with when they arise, and it's important that our communities feel safe and in their homes and their communities. So thank you for that. So for item number 13, then we have our recommendations on page 273, paragraph 11, and it's recommended that executive approve the content of the strategy that identifies the key role that the City of York Council plays in its delivery, and B, in accordance with the council's constitution, recommend this to full council for approval. Can I see those who are in approve that? Yeah, everybody, that's unanimously approved. Thank you very much, and thanks to the team, James, for everything. If you can, please, thank you. Item number 14 then is next on the agenda, and this is prioritisation. Prioritising supplementary planning documents, and we have Claire Fole here, Interim Director for City Development, and Alison Cook, Head of Strategic Planning Policy. Is that your current title, Alison? Oh, yeah, very good. I wasn't quite sure. Thank you very much for that, and please go ahead, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. So we've brought to you the emerging and soon to be adopted local plan supplementary planning documents. These set out the these respond to the overarching planning policy framework set out in the adopted, soon to be adopted local plan, and provide further technical detail, allowing and supporting people to implement the specific policies set out in the local plan, aiming to support internal and external stakeholders, deliver both the expectations and the ambitions set out in, as I've said, the emerging local plan. Executive approved the three priority supplementary planning documents in January 2023, which are at a greater stage of development. They are affordable housing, climate change, and green infrastructure. We took these three prioritised supplementary planning documents and the full list of supplementary planning documents to the local plan working group on Tuesday, who provided us with a series of recommendations, which Alison will talk through shortly. We will update you on these and provide you in the report on paragraph 24, which sets out the list of supplementary planning documents and the reasons why we've brought them to you today. There is an emerging tension, which we should highlight, within the proposed amendments in the National Policy Planning Framework, as shared in paragraph 16 of the report, whereby the emerging local plan could be adopted with the supplementary planning documents then developed, whilst the local plan is then refreshed, amending policies described in the supplementary planning documents. At this stage, it's too early to predict what might happen, and we will need to advise you on the timetable and impact of these revisions once we have further clarity. I'll hand over to Alison to pull out some more of the detail.
Thank you. So just to add in to Claire's introduction, in terms of SPDs, we use these as a planning tool. They are a technical planning tool, and do add that clarity to the planning approach. This is an accepted way that other local authorities are using planning SPDs, and we have draft SPDs in place, which we've outlined in the report already. We think that they do add that external interpretation and internal interpretation to add that consistency and efficiency to how we provide policy advice. But I should just draw to your attention that SPDs build upon the existing policy approach as Claire set out. So they cannot set new policy and have to build upon the approach already set in that policy. This means we can only produce SPDs where there is a policy hook in the current local plan. We have highlighted in the report that we're looking at a number of guidance pieces, which may have benefit and could become a material consideration on other matters where there isn't sufficient hook in the local plan, but where we think that there could be additional guidance that would be helpful to planning decisions. As a result of the local plan working group, the recommendations that they made in terms of the report were to amend recommendation 10 regarding how we're dealing with short-term housing lets to include consideration of short-term housing lets in the housing SPD if timescales do align. We're currently awaiting further understanding from central government in terms of legislative requirements for short-term housing lets, which is why that's got that caveat in terms of timescales. Also, there was quite a discussion around funding. So we said that we would approach, there was a recommendation to approach the combined authority for potential funding to support delivery of SPDs to address resourcing challenges and expedite delivery alongside managing the wider policy changes in the wider policy landscape. The SPD should acknowledge the social model of disability in each SPD. And that this should be explicit, and to that extent, there was quite
a recommendation to look at our table 1 on page 311 of your report, again, to make sure accessibility in particular is more visible. And to scope into the housing SPD, reference and appropriate details for houseboats, which currently would sit alongside our modification recommendation to our policy H3 regarding housing mix.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you for updating us also on the outcome of local plan working group, because it is important to us that members have the opportunity to feed in, even in what can be quite tight timeframes. So can I see who would like to speak on this item? No?
Councillor Stewart was tallying my comments on Tuesday, so I won't add any more to them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pavlovic?
Thank you, and thank you, Alison, and all of the team that have worked so hard on preparing this. I was talking about gestation periods earlier. That's nothing compared to the local plan, but these SPDs are incredibly important. But as Alison has pointed out, they are only in addition to the policies that are outlined in the plan. An SPD cannot set new policy. That's dependent on a refresh of the local plan, if it's not already in there. There are a number of them that are well progressed. Climate change. Affordable housing is moving on, though we've had bits added to its scope, including HMOs, for example, and now the request, which I think is incredibly important, around short-term holiday lets. The caveat again is that we await legislation, and with a number of these SPDs. We're awaiting we're awaiting change in the law, and to be honest, even these may get overtaken by events, because we are dependent also on the inspectorate. So, for example, the inspectorate may give us their verdict on the draft plan that's already in, after the draft of the NPPF, which tells you when you've got to refresh your report. Hopefully that's not the case, but it might be, which means that then we may have to go into an immediate review, which will then leave this having to be pushed into the long grass, essentially. So we are where we are. It's good that we've got stuff moving. Resources are always going to be the issue, and that's been pointed out, and it was pointed out at local plan working group. You know, in 2015 there were significantly more members of the team than there are now, and it's very sad that number was cut down during the last two administrations, but they work incredibly hard and incredibly diligently, and we're incredibly lucky to have them. So with the additions that Alison's outlined from the local plan working group, I'd like to propose that we follow the recommendations in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Pavlovic. So we have got a lot of recommendations here. They are on page 312, paragraph 24, and we've got 1 through 7 that refer to the SPDs that are going to be taken forward, and suggestion of those that are in the next phase of prioritisation. And it says that each of the draft SPDs will be reported to executive for agreement to proceed to statutory public consultation and subsequently adoption, but that will depend, I would imagine, on where our local plan is in process, or if it's approved according to the new MPPF that will come out in future months. But alongside Councillor Pavlovic, I really hope we've got that approved before that the MPPF is revised again. Surely. So recommendations 8, 9 and 10. So we've got members' note response to the petition on HMO thresholds and continued monitoring of policies implementation as for consideration as part of future policy review. And I assume this must be referred to in the fact that we need a new policy in order to move forward with that, due to the hook not being strong enough in the local plan, the emerging local plan at this point in time. Alison, do you want to correct me if I'm wrong there?
So the emerging local plan now sets out the thresholds in policy terms, which has been through the examination process. So in order to amend that policy approach, it would be triggered by the monitoring and evidence gathering and put into the scope of a new plan.
Okay, thank you. 9 is members agree continued gathering of evidence to support potential Article 4 direction to remove permitted development rights, allowing changes of use of a building in commercial, business and service use to residential. And 10, and I'm going to ask you to add in further to this, members agree the continued gathering of evidence ahead of government introducing changes relating to short-term holiday lets, which could support a potential Article 4 direction to restrict permitted development rights in this area as well. And what was the additional, the add-on that local plan working group asked on that, please?
That this was included within the housing SPD if timescales allowed.
Okay, thank you very much. That makes perfect sense. Right, can I see those who are in favour of those 10 recommendations? Yeah, that's approved unanimously. Thank you. And please move ahead with the SPDs. Thank you very much. Item number 15 is enforcement policy, and we have here Matt Boxall to introduce that to us. Is there a name badge over there for you, Matt? Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So Matt is Head of Public Protection and is all things enforcement in the council. So off you go, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this report proposes a new enforcement policy, which, if you approve it, will apply pretty much council-wide. As you say, I am here from Public Protection presenting this. I wouldn't say I'm quite all things in enforcement, however, officers across the council who are all things enforcement have definitely been involved and helped pull this together. So this new policy will provide the framework under which services can set underlying sub-policies or procedures about how they will do enforcement in specific circumstances. The key guiding principle under the policy is that services will provide help and guidance to ensure compliance with the law before turning to formal enforcement action, such as prosecution. There are, however, some circumstances where formal enforcement action may be more appropriate even in the first instance, and these are listed in Appendix 2. These instances support the council plan priorities of equalities, affordability, climate and health improvements. There has been extensive consultation with residents and businesses, both on the list of instances which may trigger formal enforcement action in the first instance and on the policy itself. The consultation showed respondents were supportive of the policy. The biggest change which came about was to bring within the scope of the policy council debt collection, which during the consultation was thought to be out of scope. So the only two areas that therefore now remain out of scope are action taken by Veritu in relation to fraud against the council, where there is a specific counter fraud policy that applies, and action taken by national trading standards teams, which are based here in York, who are essentially funded to take prosecutions on behalf of other authorities. That, councillors, is my introduction to the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. And this falls under my area of policy, and particularly because it seemed to have cross implications and importance across many departments. So it is a hugely important part of what the council does in order to protect our environment, our city, people, and also our money across organisations. So thank you for all of the work that has been done on this, and it's very good to codify it all in one place, so it's useful for the public to be able to review it, but also for officers to be able to come together in a proactive way around enforcement, which is tremendously important, and we know our residents really value it. So I don't think anybody else wants to say anything. It's just me on this one. No. Okay, thank you very much. And so the recommendations are on page 373 for this, and it says at paragraph 8 that the executive adopt the policy in order to guide officers and ensure a consistent approach when enforcement activity is undertaken by the council. Can I see those in favour of that recommendation? Thank you. That's unanimously approved. Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you've done on this. We really value it, and go and enforce. Thank you. And then finally, we come to item number 16, which is the Lord Mayoralty points allocation. And who is presenting this paper to us? I think you might be. Bryn, Director of Governance, it's his paper. Are you in a position to be able to do this for us? Do you want to do it, Ian? Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I can attempt to do it. I mean, in simple terms, you're probably aware there is a points system for the nomination, and obviously then taking up the Lord Mayoralty. On paragraph 9, it just shows you what the normal point system would be in terms of what would happen under a normal year, and that would be that the Labour group with 19 points would qualify for the Mayoralty in 25-26. Probably the key bit though is the in para 11, the Conservative group has submitted a request to have its previous points deduction from 1920 reinstated. Some members will recall that the Conservatives were due to have the Mayoralty. They made a decision in November 2018. However, following the election, which took place in May 19, the member who actually had been nominated was no longer a councillor, and as Para 12 sets out, they actually only had 2 members. One of those members was newly elected, so could not actually take up the role. So they were clearly dwindling fast in terms of who could actually do it. There was only one member who could take up the role potentially, but they were unable to secure the release from their employment, so they gave it up. That led to the losing the points, and as you can see, they have now made a request effectively to have those reinstated. If that is reinstated, that then leads to para 13, a table there, and you can see the revised points system, and that would lead to the Conservative group being qualifying for the Lord Mayoralty in 25-26. So that effectively is what you are being asked to do. Hopefully that's sufficient.
Thank you, Ian. Does anybody want to speak on this item? Councillor Eyre, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It probably won't surprise anyone as my consultation comments summarised there that we don't support this particular suggestion. I mean, we need to be clear, this doesn't apply to all councillors. So as I pointed out to the monitoring officer when we were consulted, there were at least 3 people that I could remember in recent times that have had this situation applied to, and this policy doesn't suggest that any of those 3 people or those 3 groups should have their points reinstated. Just this one particular Conservative councillor who clearly wants to be Lord Mayor and is seeking to jump the queue ahead of other people. I think, as was alluded to, we must be clear the Conservative group passing up their turn was because 2 of their members could not take office. It wasn't a coincidence or happenstance. It was a result of the residents of York kicking out all but 2 of their Conservative councillors. In fact, I do believe it was Councillor Lomas who was one of those responsible for the individual being nominated not being able to take up his nominations. I think it was the Acomb councillor who lost his seat. So that was the public of York giving their views on those particular individuals. What is absolutely unclear, as I say in this paper, is why on this particular occasion for this particular individual, the rules are being waived, and some of the voting behaviour that we've seen has been interesting in terms of his performance on CCSMC, and it does raise questions in residents' minds, be they legitimate or not, about what the particular reasoning behind this is. And I think all of this politics needs to be taken out of it. We have a simple system about how this is allocated. If you want to change that system, and we want to do away with that, absolutely fine. Reinstate all the points that have been deducted over the time for everybody who couldn't stand up to that. If you are just doing that for one particular individual on one particular group, then it needs to be articulated why that person is a special case ahead of everybody else that's ever been put forward for nomination.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre, and this is my paper and my decision ultimately. Group leaders were consulted upon, but Councillor Eyre didn't see that he could support it. It was a request that was made to me due to the fact that Paul Doughty, the leader of the Conservative group at that point in time, was working and couldn't take up the role. And I approved it in consultation with my members and our backbenchers who thought it was a reasonable request, and we chose to approve it. It was nothing more than that. And in fact, I've had recent conversation via email with Councillor Waters, who had raised it, and I've said to him, if he wants to come and speak to me about that issue, I am open to it. And this is just my way of doing politics and running the council, that if people want to talk to me, I'm fully open to it. And I don't see that we should stand in the way of people participating in civic life of the city just because you don't think it's the nice thing to do, I suppose, really. You want to stand in the way of it. So it is a one-off situation at this point, but if Councillor Waters wants me to consider that, I will do that too. If anybody wanted me to consider it, I would. It's no special treatment, but people have been proactive around it. So hence, we will have a Conservative, or if we vote in that way, we'll have a Conservative mayor in the next year, which I think is a good thing, quite frankly. So on that note, we have recommendations on page 418. I just need to get back into my... It's all right, I'm almost there. So I've just also been informed that it's not a policy change, it's a one-off decision based on a request that I thought was wholly reasonable. So page 418, recommendations at paragraph 6, members are asked to consider the information presented and to determine whether they wish to implement the requested reallocation of unspent points to the Conservative group for the 2019-2020 nomination to the current points calculation, and as such reinstatement to take effect for the 25-26 municipal year. And can I see those in favour of that, please? Thank you. So that is approved. Ian, would you like to?
Yeah, just one minor point. The recommendation will just need to be slightly amended to actually note the fact that you are actually approving this, because actually the recommendation as worded doesn't actually tell you what the
Yes.
decision is. So
Yeah.
just to know, we can take that away and amend it according to your, your decision, but it just will need to be worded appropriately.
So we have voted to approve that reinstatement of the points as Ian has outlined, and the recommendation will need to be adjusted slightly. So thank you very much, everybody. And so that's our final item. And we go back to the agenda. Urgent business, I imagine, is my final thing, just to check so I don't make a mistake. Urgent business is item number 17, and I've not been notified of any. So that is the end of our meeting, and thank you everybody for joining us. Good evening.